Hello everyone. Today I am going to be briefly discussing, or at least trying to briefly discuss, the pirate sequels. And what I mean by the pirate sequels is I mean the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise sequels 1, 2, and 2, 3, and 4, excuse me. I'm not going to talk about the first one because the first one seems to be held in a higher light, and I can kind of see why. But that's not to say that these sequels don't or didn't have potential. There is still some stuff in the sequels that I find to be fairly creative, well thought out ideas. It's just, it seems like it's an oversplooge of creativity, but it seemed like the writers didn't really know what to do with that creativity, and I'm gonna kind of explain this and what people seem to have a problem with when it comes to 2, 3, and 4, and these are kind of present throughout all three, so again I'm kind of gonna be talking about them together, sort of similar in how I talked about the Star Wars prequels. So without further ado, what is it about these sequels that seems to rub people the wrong way and kind of sort of make me feel in the same category as those people? I think the plot is needlessly complex and long and drawn out. Just because it's complex doesn't make it engaging and doesn't make it interesting. Again, there's a lot of stuff going on within these sequels, but at the same time it seems like that they don't seem to do a lot of stuff with this. It seems like it really drags. There's scenes where you felt like they could have just literally cut it out and it would have made a difference. It really tries to drag this plot on and on and on and on and on. And it seems like that they were just trying to compound themselves with how much they could throw. And some of these ideas sort of stick, and then some of them don't. And I feel like that it's just a mix of plot points within the sequels that make certain aspects work, and then where you just look at it and it becomes such a cluttered mess. Like, I understand double crossing. I mean, I think that double crossing thing is kind of clever, especially considering the fact that we're dealing with pirates here. But at the same time, do we have to needlessly draw out all of these double crossings? Do we have to needlessly point out every single little thing? Do we have to needlessly throw in jokes that really we don't need? It almost seems like these sequels were sort of overindulgent in themselves, and that they try to shove so much at you, but then you get so little out of it. And I feel like that's what I feel like when it comes to these prequels or these sequels. I think they're good popcorn fun, but when you really look at them, they didn't have the simplistic charm that sort of the first film had. And that's why I'm leaving the first film out, is because I feel like the sequels sort of took it and felt like that they needed to make it over the top. They needed to go all out and all overboard. And you don't really necessarily need to do that. So I think had they cut scenes, had they tried to make things a little bit more compact and concise, had they maybe focused in on not trying to overthrow too many characters in our face, I think it would have come up a lot stronger. These sequels would have come up a lot stronger. I feel like that there are a lot of scenes that could be cut. There are a lot of scenes that aren't really necessary, and don't really serve a purpose, and sometimes sometimes the scenes too are just kind of needlessly drawn out. Like you can have a scene there of Jack Sparrow doing this, but don't make it like take up 10 minutes of the film. Maybe make it take up 3 minutes or 4. Just like these kinds of simple tasks of just editing it down to the point where it's easier for an audience to follow, I think would have made it come across more effectively. Now, that's not to say that you can't make your characters complex, that you can't make the story complex, but it would be nice had they, I think, focused in on trying to make a more concise plot. And I think that conciseness could have come from them deciding to leave Will and Elizabeth out of the sequels at all. I felt like in the first film they served their purpose. They had a happy ending. They had everything feel tied up in a nice bow for the first film. Why did they need to come back? Why did their story need to be continued, and why did it have to be so tragic? Like, why did it have to be sad? I mean, I don't understand the point. Like, it felt like that they just wanted to drag a romance as far as they could and turn it from from how it was in the first film, where it seems rather charming, to something that's just so, like, complicated and sort of ugly at times, and at times just to the point where we're not really invested in the characters because they are really not that interesting. I think Will and Elizabeth's relationship is not all that compelling. I don't see the point in why they need to be included in these other films. They sort of dragged, I think, the series down. They didn't really offer much to the table. Again, they do have their double-crossing moments, and again, you could say that Will sort of changes a little bit and tries to have has a different approach when it comes to dealing with these circumstances that he comes across. But at the same time, to me, it felt including their characters and making the story about them too was needless. I didn't see a point in bringing these characters back because these weren't really the characters that people got invested in, because they weren't even really pirates to begin with. Like, why do they need to suddenly be dragged back into a pirate world? Like, what's the necessity of doing so? Just so that we can maybe have a scene where Will meets his dad? I mean, I don't know. It just really a part of me feels like that had they focused not so much on these characters, had they just let them be for the first film, they would have, I think it wouldn't have brought the film down at all to not include them, because they contributed their part. They obviously were people that kind of, even though Elizabeth sort of does have this sort of fascination with pirates, I feel like at the same time, you know, these people, Will and Elizabeth, do want some kind of normalcy. It felt like at the end of the film that they were just all gonna go on their separate ways, and I felt like it was just sort of needless to throw them in again and have them somehow have a continuing story. I thought it would have been nicer had they just left them out, and instead gone with a more, and I sort of don't like to compare films, because again, I think films are unique and I don't like to draw comparisons, but I felt like these sequels would have been a lot stronger had they focused in on more of an Indiana Jones type structure, meaning that we have this one character named Captain Jack Sparrow who goes on these adventures and sees these different things, and then we see him develop as a character, and we see how he has to deal with different things, and you see how he has to come across different obstacles and deal with different characters. To me, that would have been a lot more fascinating. That would have been a lot more concise as well, because you don't have these other characters. You don't have Will and Elizabeth that you have to tie in the background. You don't have to force their story into the bigger story, which is adventure. You don't need to put them in there. You can put in other characters. You can put in people like Penelope Cruz, which they finally did towards the fourth film, even though the characters I think are good, I still think, yeah, maybe the acting is not so up at par. But at the same time, just give us like a variety of different characters throughout each story, in a similar formula to Indiana Jones, where you see him do one adventure and then it's done, and then he moves on to the next one, has his adventure done, moves on to the third one, done, conclude. To me, that would have been a lot stronger had they focused in on Jack Sparrow as a character, had him go through these various journeys and sort of end. That to me would have been a lot stronger. And the ironic thing too is that since Pirates of the Caribbean is sort of based upon a ride at Disneyland, I find it funny that Indiana Jones is at Disneyland too. These kinds of similar ideas of adventure, but it seemed like they were trying to do a Star Wars thing where they were going more of like with a Star Wars type story, because again, you could argue that the fourth one's a completely different adventure, but at the same time, I don't think the Star Wars structure works for this, because in order to do so, you need really compelling characters from the start on. And to me, Will and Elizabeth weren't that compelling of characters to have them have a continuing story. I think if they cut them out and focused in on Johnny Depp, focused in on Jack Sparrow, and actually made it like maybe a trilogy, or made it something like Indiana Jones, where Jack Sparrow goes on these adventures, but they're all about pirates, and they all deal with like maybe different legends and different stories, or something like that, dealing with pirates, then to me that formula makes sense. I think that could work to the filmmaker's huge advantage, because you don't have to overcomplicate things. You don't have to overanalyze every single little detail. You can just make a simple feel-good pirate story with maybe a little dark undertones too, like how Indiana Jones was trying to be a little bit darker in the Temple of Doom, Like, see, this formula works, and I think for pirates it works because it's adventure. Pirates are about adventure. They're not about romance. They're not about being overly complex. Pirates are pirates. When they see gold, when they see booze, they're all over that, like, just make it about pirates and just go with that. I think that would have just made these sequels a lot stronger. And then we wouldn't have to deal again with sort of the sadness of the ending of the couple sort of having to live this really tormented sort of life, and we wouldn't have to have it needlessly thrown at us as a tragedy, because it's no different than, something like Titanic. It's no different than any other romantic tragedy. It just doesn't serve, I think, a purpose. It's like we don't need romance in a pirates movie. Or if we do, it can be maybe a little bit more comedical or lighthearted or something, because it's pirates. I mean, more like how Johnny Depp's character Jack Sparrow interacts with Penelope Cruz in the fourth film. besides having scenes that needed to be cut from these sequels, also Will and Elizabeth, I think not being in the second and third film would have enhanced these sequels a lot better. And I think had they made it more concise, it wouldn't have come off as more of a gimmick to get people to watch Pirates. So that's all I think I can say about that. Now, what can I say that actually works from the Pirate sequels? I think there's a lot of again, like I said before, I think there's a lot of creativity in this. I think some of the creativity is warranted. Other times I feel like it's a little bit over the top. I felt like they had a lot of ideas, but they needed to narrow down those ideas so that we could have gotten a more clear story. The fact that the DVD, actually I heard of that they actually had things where people would ask questions about the movie, and then they would be provided with answers, because again, the movie kind of even in of itself knows that it's a little complex. Again, not to saying that you can't challenge your audience, and or that audience can't challenge the filmmakers, but at the same time, it almost feels like that at times these creative elements that came in there made the plot more confusing or more just out there and unnecessary. Like when Jack Sparrow in the third one, I believe, this was when he like becomes part of the ship or whatever, and they just do it for just some comedic effect, and it really doesn't come across as anything. And again, it's just really, there's just some really odd choices that they decided to make, and I just felt like these kinds of awkward moments that they had kind of dragged the films down and didn't make me engaged into what was happening. So again, it almost seemed like, again, they were trying to throw as many stuff to the wall in the audience as they could, and hoping that somehow it sticks, instead of just trying to focus in on some things and trying to make them really work. They were just trying to hammer it and just think and hammer and think and hammer down any creative elements they could put in, but not really thinking in-depthly about each creative element, but thinking about creativity as a whole. Like thinking of the film as this epic, grand spectacle, because they really try to ham up the sequels. They really, really try to make them like these over-the-top, like epic battles and things. And you can do that, but make us emotionally invested at the same time. So again, there are times where I feel like it can hit stuff well creatively and it works, and then other times it's just needless. So again, focusing, and again, you could bring back Godfrey Rush's character. Again, Indiana Jones did bring back some characters, but maybe didn't make them the focal point. And the thing is they really try to emphasize that Will and Elizabeth are a focal point in the first two ones. The fourth one, I feel like, suffers sort of similar problems in that the plot's too complex, and then they add in another romance between a mermaid and a priest. It's cute, but it's weird, and it kind of, you're like, at the end you go, what was the point? I don't understand. what was the need? So yeah, I think they were just trying to put too much in it, and then you go in and it's kind of like Iron Man 3, where you're just being shoved so much stuff at you. It's fun, but it's not memorable. That's why I think the sequels, what's the problem with the these pirate sequels, is that they're fun, but they're not memorable. And the reason why they're not memorable is kind of these reasons that I mentioned. They made the plot, they didn't cut down scenes, they didn't try to make it more concise, they didn't try to make the characters a little bit more compelling. They instead relied on sort of this over jamming of creativity and double crossing to somehow please the audience. And to me, I'd rather have a simplistic film that does things really well than have a film that does a bunch of stuff but doesn't execute a lot of stuff well. And again, this is sort of ties into Indiana Jones, and that Indiana Jones is fairly simple. It doesn't really rely on much, but what it has is good enough, and it's what the film requires. And I feel like that had they made it more compact, had they maybe followed a more Indiana Jones-like formula, again, not saying that we're making Jack Sparrow like Indiana Jones at all, but I'm saying structuring the stories in a way where it's concise enough and easy for the audience to follow, but at the same time cool and creative and interesting. Especially when the Pirates franchise was trying to market to teens and to kids. You know, I mean, I understand that at times, you know, things can be violent and a little dark. That's okay, but I feel like that the sequels just didn't handle those elements all that well. It kind of comes off as odd at times. So really, all I can ultimately say is that had they made it more concise, made it more consistent, focused in more on Jack Sparrow's character instead of trying to throw these bazillion characters at us, had they tried to make things a little bit more interesting, had they stuck to the idea of leaving Will and Elizabeth at the door from the first film, had they not included a priest and a mermaid love story in the fourth film, and had they focused in particular Godfrey Rush as well as Johnny Depp, those two characters work really well, and they really, really, really make the series work. Because again, think about the marketing strategy behind this. If they didn't have Jack Sparrow, then the series would just fall flat on itself. If they didn't have Johnny Depp, nobody would go watch it. So it's clear that you need to make this person the main focus. If you don't make him the main focus, then how are people going to get invested? And that's why I felt like Will and Elizabeth served their purpose in the first film and didn't need to necessarily have a continuation of their story. And this priest and this mermaid didn't need to suddenly fall in love for whatever reason. Or even have them there at all. Like, they weren't really necessarily all that memorable. Maybe the mermaid a little bit more memorable than the priest, but again, I think had they just, again, made it a lot more concise, focused more on Jack Sparrow, made and kind of dissed the characters that I've already mentioned, then they probably would have had a more better adventure type film series. But do I think they need to make more Pirates films? I think at this point I want to say no, because I think it's been done. You don't need to do it anymore. We get the point. We get the issues that were already brought up with these sequels. You don't need to bring them up again. You had your chance. You had your chance within 3 movies to try to come up with something. But at the same time, I feel like that it would be a nice idea, but they would have to completely start from scratch again, because again they've had so much build up already with all of these other films that to me I just feel like that it's pretty much done. The fourth film was really the last one. Who's to say whether or not they'll make another one? But for me, I feel like that if they do make another film, they're going to suffer from the same issues, because they've already existed in 3 films, and then you just have one film that's just sort of standing out from in the way background, who actually started the whole thing, who was actually maybe a little bit more simplistic and a little bit more entertaining than other films that tried to be so epic and grand. But again, they are fun films. I'm not saying that these films are a real downer. I think that these films have a lot of cool things in them, but they're cool things that you forget, and they're not memorable, and it's sad, because it really seemed like that they were trying with the plot and with the double crossing and with everything to try to keep everything as consistent as they could, but at the same time it just came out as a cluttered mess, and you can't really do that to an audience. You kind of have to realize what your films are, and that your films are pirates films. Indiana Jones knows what it is and embraces it for what it is. And I felt like these films had a hard time kind of realizing that these films are about pirates. You know, these films are not supposed to be like these really grand, epic spectacles. They're supposed to be fun, entertaining, amusing, engaging stories. And the problem is just that they were too long. The sequels were too long, too overly and needlessly complicated, where scenes could be cut. They could have gone in different directions with characters instead of putting back the ones we've already seen. And again, that would have made it, I think, a totally better would have made them totally better sequels. Could they have made 4 films? Yeah, I guess they could have. I think 4 is sort of pushing it. I like the idea if they could have been about Jack Sparrow and sort of ending with Jack Sparrow, you know, in a similar way like Indiana Jones. You have the character, he's the main focus, you have all these other characters and adventures that he goes on, and then you have the series end. And not overstaying its welcome. Could that be with 3 or 4 films? Yeah. I mean, it just kind of depends on where they would have chosen to go with it. But to me, they tried to. I think they could have done a lot of really creative elements, but it seemed like that it was really trying to overham itself, and really try to be overly complex in order to, I guess, entertain the audience. And to me, it didn't really come off that way, and that it came off as needlessly complicated and overdone. So I think if the film or these sequels had embraced this kind of direction that I mentioned, then it would have come out a lot better. Perfect? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I think a lot stronger. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who probably do still like the sequels of Pirates, and I can definitely understand that. I can totally get behind the idea of you thinking that these are genius and, you know, fun popcorn movies to watch. I can totally get that. But for me, I feel like it would have been a lot stronger had they taken the route of trying to make it a little bit more simplistic, a little bit more concisely structured, and focus more on Jack Sparrow and focus more on his adventures and the characters that he comes across, then to me you would have had, I think, some stronger works that would have come out of this series. But again, this is all just opinion, so obviously, the opinions are not facts, and I say that even though they were needlessly over the top, I will say that I still find them rather enjoyable at times, and not so much enjoyable to the point where I would see them again, but enjoyable to see once. And again, it's just kind of like an entertainment gimmick, it's fun while you watch it, but what do you get out of it? Nothing much. So I think that's really ultimately all I can say. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I think that's really all I can say. Thank you so much for your time, and goodbye.